corner. Save me. Knocking over cups. Drinking far too much. Can you mend me, baby? Oh, I ought to know when it's time to go, but that's alright.
It's Monday morning. It is October 18th. And you're tuned in to Real Talk. Thanks for making time for the show. Jesperson here with Hoyles and Brooks. It's great to be back in studio. This episode is presented by our good friends at Bitcoin Well, recently recognized as one of Canada's top growing companies in the Globe and Mail's third annual business ranking. The 172nd fastest growing company in Canada. 172 out of 448. Pretty good. They got there because of their 3-year revenue growth of 254%. Kicking ass and taking names. We love it. You can find Bitcoin Well under the sponsors tab on our website, RyanJesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
It's great to be back. The show took some time away to charge our batteries, work on a couple of things. I had an opportunity to speak to an attentive audience organized by Lethbridge College, as a matter of fact, mid last week, about disrupting the media industry, which I guess is what we're doing every day here on Real Talk, which was pretty fantastic. An attentive audience, and I'm grateful for everybody that showed up and participated in that dialogue. Of course, it's election day today in our home province of Alberta, which means that at the very least, Alberta's 5 most populated cities, Alberta's 5 biggest cities, will all see new mayors by this evening or into tomorrow. And so that makes for interesting storylines, of course, in Calgary, Edmonton, in Lethbridge, in Red Deer, and in the regional municipality of Wood Buffalo and Fort McMurray. Plus, of course, you could see change in other Alberta communities, but there's a lot to keep an eye on. And then, of course, these referendum questions, too. And so in our province, depending on where you're listening to us or tuning in from or even watching us live on YouTube from across Canada, you may not be up to speed on exactly what's going on, but there's more than just city councilors, mayors, and school trustees that'll be chosen by the people today. Calgarians are going to be casting votes on fluoride in the water, and Albertans are going to be essentially answering Premier Jason Kenney's question, do you think that Alberta deserves, I mean, this is actually more of a direct question than it is phrased. I mean, this is actually a little bit less ambiguous, but essentially the question is, do you think Alberta deserves a better deal? Really what the question is around, do you support removing a certain section, 36.2, out of the Constitution that relates to equalization? And so Albertans today will go to the polls, answer that question, and of course also on daylight saving time. Albertans are going to decide. Sarah Hoyles rolling her eyes so hard, you're at risk of a migraine on this Monday morning. I've seen different opinions on the daylight saving time question. I think I'm more inclined to roll my eyes at the equalization question than the daylight saving question. How about you? I mean, are both of them? Do you have your mind made up? Do you feel like you understand each question clearly enough to have a definitive position on this?
Oh, when you put it like that,
yeah.
I'm clear on how I'm going to be casting my
you
votes.
You feel like you understand the questions clearly, understand the issues clearly, ready to go.
Yes, but I feel like the questions were written in a way to be confusing and to muddy the waters.
Referendum questions often are.
They're also so stupid.
Sam, have you made up your mind on where you're going to get? That's the most scathing assessment to this point. Not necessarily inaccurate. Have you made up your mind? I'm not asking you which way you're going to vote or where you're going to go, but do you feel like you understand the questions clearly on daylight saving time?
No on no on equalization, no on daylight savings time. Back to you, Ryan.
Okay, Sam, there you go. I think that a lot of people are feeling, some nervousness around where the daylight saving question is going to go, because it will have real impacts on people. It'll have real impacts on people's lives, and you may kind of go, oh, come on, what is it? Change the clocks twice a year or not? That's basically it. But the more people that I've talked to And the more that I've tried to understand, remember, we seek to understand on Real Talk. We just steal that from Stephen Covey. We can't put it on a billboard because it's stolen, but I think it's good advice. I've realized that some people do truly feel or are predicting that a change to daylight saving time, in other words, moving to permanently remain on daylight saving time, could have an impact on their lives, on their careers, on the people around them, on their health. A lot of people are talking about how, this could mean in the winter, especially in central to northern jurisdictions. If the further north that you live, it could mean that the sun's coming up at 10:30 in the morning in the winter. So for some people, that's a pretty big deal for different reasons. So we'll see where that goes. I believe, and I'm not the first to say this, that this referendum question on equalization will serve to a certain degree to poll the public, or I think it'll act as a barometer of sorts with regards to where people are on this provincial government. It's essentially, I guess, the Premier asking Albertans today, are you still with me or not?
Yeah.
And I think if you would have asked anybody, regardless of how you feel about the question or regardless of how you would vote on the question, most people, including me, would have forecasted up to maybe even several weeks ago, or at least up until a couple of months ago, that this question will see 85% yes votes. 85 to 90% yes. Albertans will overwhelmingly say we deserve a better deal. I'm not sure that's the case anymore.
Wow. Okay. Do you have any?
I mean, I don't know if I want to predict it, because if I predict it, I could end up looking like just absolutely out to lunch. But I'm going to say high 60s.
Okay.
I think let's give it like a 2/3. I think it'll see like a 65 to 68% yes vote. So, let's say that I think that the movement may have lost approximately 20 points of support. But again, it's non-binding.
Yeah,
and it's
okay,
insignificant, and it really means nothing. But as the Premier, believes it's an opportunity for Alberta to send a message, or to continue to send a message to Ottawa with regards to the season of Albertans' discontent. So I'm curious to know where you land on that. Coming up, we have a little bit of a different approach to our question of the week this week, presented by our research and strategy partners at Y Station. Typically on a Monday, we push out our question of the week and we ask you to chime in and let us know where you're at with it. We will, this Monday, today, be getting into the results of our most recent question of the week, but we're waiting to launch our next one until tomorrow morning. We're going to wait until we know the results of the municipal elections. We're going to wait until we understand more about how Albertans, how people in our home province voted, and then we're going to go to you with our question of the week. How do you feel about it? Are you surprised? Are you excited? Are you disappointed? Did this play out the way that you thought it would, et cetera, et cetera? So our question of the week is going to be coming up tomorrow, presented by the team at Y Station. In addition to it being election day, and I know that I feel like people in Edmonton and Calgary in particular have their hearts in their throats a little bit today. No incumbents, right? Mayors Ned Nenshi and Don Iveson are both moving on from at least this stage of their political careers. And that means that the race is wide open. And as I said earlier, not just in Calgary and Edmonton, in Red Deer, in Lethbridge, in Fort McMurray. And these are city centers with, flirting with 100,000 people in each of these city centers. So these are not small scenarios. These are significant elections. But in particular, in Calgary and Edmonton, you have some of these mayoral candidates talking about making some pretty big promises and talking about some pretty big things. I mean, there are candidates out there that would cancel big transit projects that are already underway. There are some candidates that I know that feel very strongly. They're making big promises about things like freezing property taxes, which, of course, I think most people realize would be pretty tough to do right now with regards to where the economics are post-pandemic. I'm just going to encourage you. The show's not taking a specific position with regards to endorsing mayoral candidates today. I'm still, wondering how this is all going to play out, and I'm curious to see where the numbers go. What I will encourage you to do today is to take and I know this is where it comes. It happens on every show. Every single person with a platform on election day is going to do this sort of like just like a mini, and it's not like a lecture. It's just a mini. It's like a charge. You know, if you go to a wedding and at the reception somebody delivers like a charge, it's like the challenge. It's like, make us proud. That's what this is today, is to take your vote seriously, to remember that the unfortunate thing about democracy is that everybody gets a vote. Just kidding. But seriously, a lot of these candidates have rallied hard, and they're going to have these armies showing up to vote today. And
not actual armies.
Not actual, well, and as the saying goes, if you don't vote, you've surrendered or lost your right to complain until the next election. And so if you want to keep joining us here on Real Talk and taking swipes at the elected representatives, the least you can do today is take 5 minutes and go vote. In all seriousness, we encourage you to do so. And we expect, I mean, depending on who wins, at least in Calgary and Edmonton, we expect that we'll probably have a conversation or two, we expect, with some of the people that are in the midst and right in the mix of those mayoral elections. Coming up in just a second, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Of course, we'll flirt a little bit with election talk today. We'll dip our toes in the pool. We may even move around in the shallow end. But to this point, we've covered it. We've spoken to 9 of the top 10 polling mayoral candidates in Calgary and Edmonton. If you feel like you require more information in those 2 major urban centers before you vote, you can find those 10-minute vignettes on our YouTube channel. You can find them anywhere you download podcasts. That was from Friday, October 8th. Correct? I think I got the date right. It was from Friday, October 8th. That's when we spoke to 9 of the top 10 polling mayoral candidates. You can check those out. But now we wait and see. Tomorrow we'll have more to talk about. Tomorrow we'll have more to sink our teeth into. Ken is letting me know that while there may not be armies showing up to votes, he's chimed in on our live chat on YouTube, some will be wearing camo sweats. And he's not wrong. It is into sweats season, and so we could have that. Maybe even a couple of orange hats. What are you wrinkling your nose at here? What are you?
Every season is sweat season.
Well, but fall is more sweat season. We're getting back into the sweaters and the hoodies.
I think
the
it's
bunny
long john
hugs,
season.
The bunny hugs for our friends in Saskatchewan. Have you put on long johns yet this year?
I have.
You have.
I did some owl tagging out at the Beaver Hills Bird Observatory over the week.
Pardon me. Excuse me. What?
Owl tagging.
You were tagging owls.
I was playing tag with some owls.
Like what? You sedate them and then put the little bands on their legs?
I was just tagging along with naturalists, and they were.
Wow.
Yeah, we were out at night, and there were like big nets that if you did, I just saw myself leaning into one and getting trapped, but I didn't. And
They catch them in nets?
Yeah.
And the owls they can't avoid the nets?
No, I mean, of course, my bleeding heart, I kept asking all the questions like,
Yeah.
are they okay?
Yeah.
Physiologically, are they okay? And they're like, oh, yeah, they're fine.
Wow. And what kinds of owls?
Saw-whet owls. These little guys, they're like about maybe half a foot when they're full grown.
Owls are just the coolest.
They really are. It was an alien abduction for them, for sure.
Wow, yeah.
Like all these headlamps, and they're like, what is going on? Anyways.
Wow. So you had the long johns on for that.
Yes, that is what we were talking about. Long johns on for that.
You and I do a good job of bringing the focus back. Sam, have you yet put on have you transitioned to fall wardrobe yet?
Like a little bit. And I say that because like my default is usually when I leave work, I usually shed the sport coat, shed the trousers, and just roll up my sleeves.
Just drops his drawers.
Just drops it, yeah, and just just roll up my sleeves and put a pair of shorts on. I can't do that anymore. So
Attaboy.
Now it's jeans. I haven't put a pair of long johns on yet, but they're coming.
That feels like that. I like that. It's like it's kind of like a tip of the cap, a bit of a nod to the old school. You get home from work and just drop the pants. The pants just come off, you know what I mean? The trousers.
Those are the words he used. Or slacks.
Yeah, the slacks.
I can't bring myself to say slacks. So
Really?
I go for trousers. I mean, they're the same thing, but yeah.
There you go. I feel like trousers is a little bit more like Little House on the Prairie, while slacks is a little more.
Mad Men.
Is it Mad Men? Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
then I'm changing teams.
Yeah.
I'm now on Team Slack.
Okay, there you go. We're going to get serious in just a second. We're not talking about a lot of election stuff today for obvious reasons. There's not a whole lot left to talk about now. We got to let the cards fall where they may. So get out and vote. Coming up in just a couple of seconds. Very much looking forward to this conversation with Vandana Juneja. We're going to talk about essentially workplace equity and how COVID has affected women, and in a particularly I was going to say particularly offensive, but I don't know. That's so offensive, but it pissed a lot of people off when a cabinet minister in Alberta by the name of Doug Schweitzer went on the record talking about job creation in Alberta and basically said a lot of women came back into the workplace because a lot of women took time off during COVID. And I was off the grid for a significant part of last week on purpose, away from signals, away from social media. And when I came back and started catching up and I saw that quote, I went, oh, here we go. And so we're going to get into that in just a second. We're going to talk about land acknowledgements today. What does this mean when New Brunswick walking away from land acknowledgements, saying we can't do these really anymore? They don't really work anymore. We'll find out why, what it means, why these are important to a lot of people. And then, of course, a celebrity conversation today. When we announced it from our official Real Talk RJ Twitter account yesterday, and then again on Instagram, people went nuts for Brooke Lynn Hytes. Sarah Hoyle's booking the so-called Queen of the North.
Oh, whoa. Not so-called.
Well, that's what you have to say. You have to say the so-called Queen of the North. I have experience in talk radio having interviewed a gal in Edmonton who received the Queen's, the Diamond Jubilee Medal, and then started referring to herself as the Princess of Canada. When I introduced her as the Princess of Canada, facetiously to the radio audience, we received a barrage of messages.
A litany.
From people complaining about the monarchy and how it's time to, and I had to inform almost all of them that, in fact, Amber was not the Princess of Canada. So I stand by my statement, Brooke Lynn Hytes, the so-called Queen of the North.
Okay, she's the Queen of the North in my heart.
It may become more of an official title in days to come. Before we go any further, I want to remind you that our friends at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge are so glad to be moving on from the reality that has been limited selection. For the past number of months, every car dealer in Canada has been dealing with a bottleneck of supply. They've not been able to get the vehicles in, so they've been working hard at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge to make sure that their pre-owned inventory was ready to give you what you were looking for, but the trailers are arriving. As we speak, they've got hundreds, literally, of Dodge Ram 1500 pickups. They've got more than 100 Grand Cherokees on the way, Jeep Wranglers, Dodge Durangos, those Gladiators, you know, those Jeep Gladiators everybody loves. October is their biggest sale of the year, so check them out online via our sponsors tab on our website or in person at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. Also wanted to remind you that our friends at Eden Landscaping, they're wrapping up all of their projects right now, the summer projects where they've been basically bringing people's outdoor spaces to life, but they're also, at this time of year, starting to work with clients, return clients, and new ones on the plans. Talking about the sort of ideas that people want to manifest into their front or backyards, into their properties. How do you want to transform it? What do you want your next spring and summer to look like? It's never too early to visit landscapeedmonton.ca. Get in touch with Mike and his team at Eden Landscaping. All right, so let's get to this. As mentioned, a cabinet minister, the Minister of Jobs in Alberta. Technically, he's the Minister of Jobs, Economy, and Innovation, the Honorable Doug Schweitzer, on the record, saying a lot of women came back into the workforce as Alberta added 20,000 jobs last month. They came back into the workforce as the school year began because a lot of women took time off during COVID. Minister went on to say it disproportionately impacted women. That is true. And he says, we saw a lot of women return to the workforce looking for jobs in September. Says the minister, I'm optimistic with the labor shortages we're seeing in everything from drilling rigs to construction to the tech sector to the restaurant industry, that a lot of people are going to find employment over the next few months. Vandana Juneja is the executive director for Catalyst in Canada. She's a lawyer by training. has worked for a number of years to help companies advance women into leadership and create more inclusive workplaces. You may know Catalyst is a global nonprofit dedicated to helping build workplaces that work for women. Thanks so much for making time for us this morning, and welcome to Real Talk.
Thanks so much for having me.
What's your first reaction when you hear a cabinet minister say, a lot of women took time off during COVID?
Well, the statement is almost laughable, and if not laughable, I'm sure that it's angered a lot of women and individuals in general. I wouldn't really liken the time over the last year and a half for women to be taking time off. I would think of it more as incredible pressure that's been put on women, but also women have been almost forced out of the workplace over the last year and a half, just given the pressures that have been on them. Almost 500,000 Canadian women lost their jobs during the pandemic, according to a report from RBC earlier this year. And 200,000 of those women have fallen into long-term unemployment. So that means it's going to be harder for women to get back into the workplace as well. So it's really, I would say it's very much a different scenario than taking time off.
How do you, when you start talking about women re-entering the workforce, can we get into some of the barriers or some of the hurdles that might not be immediately obvious or apparent? I mean, what are some of the really significant hurdles that are standing in potentially thousands of people's way?
Sure. I mean, a lot of these hurdles or barriers that we might talk about have existed even prior to the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic has laid bare a lot of challenges with respect to certain industries, right? So if we think of, the retail sector or hospitality industry, women have absorbed around 65% of the job losses in accommodations and food services. Men have seen some of those earlier job losses as well, but in industries like manufacturing and construction, for example, but they've actually returned to work quickly. So there's a bit of a difference there. And also, I think it's really important to point out here, just in terms of the broader context, that there were more women in the labor force in 1991 than there were at the height of the pandemic. So if you think about it, 30 years ago, and I don't know for yourself, I'm probably dating myself, but in 1991, I was in undergrad. And if I think that there were just at the height of the pandemic, the same number of women, or more women at that time in the workforce than now, it really makes me pause and question, what kind of progress have we made now and what kind of impact has this pandemic had for women? So it's pretty significant. And in terms of the barriers, like I said, a lot of those barriers have existed even in advance of the pandemic. One of them is, as we would refer to, the motherhood penalty, or thinking about childcare. This has really been a huge challenge. During COVID-19, childcare and housework have mostly fallen to mothers. And according to our research at Catalyst, women are actually twice as likely to be primarily responsible for their children's homeschooling when we're thinking about, virtual homeschooling. And so research on this motherhood gap shows that women lose out on 3% of their lifetime earnings for every year that they spend away from work. And a similar penalty would apply to those taking time off to parent or to care for loved ones, whether it be children or elderly care during COVID-19. So that's a significant barrier. One of the areas that I think is really significant is which women are really hardest hit during this time. And I don't think this is particularly surprising. It's young women, it's mothers, it's newcomers to Canada, and women from underrepresented groups. So if you want to think of the term BIPOC, referring to Black professionals, Indigenous peoples, people of color, this isn't really surprising. And we can talk a bit more about that if you've got interest in that. And then also when we think about the levels of women, it's senior level women as well that are being impacted here because they're really being pushed to the brink. And that includes those individuals without children as well. So companies are really at risk of losing women in leadership as well. One of the areas that comes into play here is who is going to have these sort of courageous conversations and the more emotional type of conversations that may have been necessary over this year and a half. So one of those barriers you can think of is sort of who's responsible for some of the emotional labor, as it's referred to in the workplace, when you need to have some of those hard conversations around what people have going on outside their workplace, how they're dealing with the pandemic, and how that's playing into their work environment. So that in particular impacts women in senior level positions.
Can we get into that? I feel like we've talked a lot, obviously, about COVID-19. I mean, it feels like all we've talked about for a year and a half, quite frankly. And we've done our best, I think, to explore some of the most significant, some of the most important angles, including this one, what we're talking about today. But I've not heard a lot of people, and we as a show have not explored a lot what you've been talking about in the context of emotional labor. And that's an important one. Can we dig into that a little bit deeper?
Sure. When we're talking about the workplace, one of the things that's really critical right now, and I would say before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and it will absolutely be after the pandemic as well, is a culture of inclusion and creating an environment where we're creating safe spaces for individuals to be able to bring their whole selves to work, to be able to express who they are, and to feel valued and trusted in their environment. And so when we think about this idea of emotional labor, what the research has shown is that in particular, senior women or women in senior positions, more of that emotional burden has fallen to them. So more of these courageous conversations around what people may be experiencing in and out of the workplace during the pandemic. If you think about an individual who's working at home and they've got, let's say, a couple of teenage or university age children that are at home, they're, all clamoring for the Wi-Fi. They've got a partner or a spouse that's at home also, in meetings, on Zoom calls, and, there's sort of a lot of activity going on in the house. You've got the dog barking, you've got, another pet clamoring in front of you. And so there's a lot happening for people. And this comes together in how people are showing up in the workplace, and people are burnt out. Our research at Catalyst actually shows that, more than 92% of individuals are demonstrating that they are experiencing burnout, whether it's from work-related burnout, pandemic work-related burnout, or personal-related burnout. But that's a significant number of individuals that are experiencing what we refer to as burnout.
Interesting comment here. We've got a lot of engaged audience members that are chiming in on this and sharing personal perspectives, which are obviously so valuable in conversations like this. Tanya says, having to tell my 10-year-old daughter that she can't go to a classmate's poorly thought out Halloween party, that's an example of emotional labor. And Tanya says that kind of thing over and over and over for more than 20 months. Jillian says it's actually pretty damn embarrassing how much of the emotional labor women do. That's something that men really need to get better at. 45% of our audience is men. What do we need to get better at specifically, and how do we do it?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And I think, I look at it as, what are the opportunities, right? What are the opportunities? We can't put all of this on women. We can't put all of this on men or any of the particular genders. But what we can do is we can, the work that we do at Catalyst is really focused on organizations and what companies can do to create these environments that are more inclusive. And so I look at it as, what is the opportunity for organizations to make change and to normalize that sort of equitable balance amongst the genders. And so one of those areas is engaging men in the dialogue. We do a lot of work around this at Catalyst in terms of engaging men in inclusion. And men are often experiencing what we call being in the man box, where there's societal expectations that are put on them that, what does it mean to be a man? You hear the phrases as early as from young ages, boys don't cry, or, to be a man, you need to show up as being strong, being in control, being a problem solver, being, aggressive, like all of these sort of adjectives, as you might think of them as being what very masculine and what it means to be a man. And so there's the opportunity for men to engage in dialogue around inclusion. First of all, to have a better understanding of their own biases, also to have an understanding of their own privilege. Each and every one of us comes into the workplace with an experience of privilege. We all have these intersecting identities where, whether you're showing up as a man or woman, whether you're showing up as a husband, a father, a wife, a mother, a person of color. These are just some of our intersecting identities. But it's really important to be able to have conversations across differences. And so each of those identities may hold with it a privilege that we bring into the workplace. So men can actually recognize the privilege that they hold coming into the workplace and use that privilege to work towards creating change and creating culture change. And we talk about Catalyst, this idea of gender partnership, and that's all the genders coming together for conversation and dialogue with respect to inclusion with mutual accountability. So this is an accountability rests on everyone. It's not just on the men. It's not just on the women to solve this. This is for everyone. But the intent of it is to create culture change.
So we can talk about corporate culture change, and we can talk about bigger picture. I mean, culture change, period. How much of this revolves around resources for women either in or desiring to participate in the workforce, things like subsidized or supported childcare? How big of a part of the conversation is childcare?
Well, I mean, I think childcare is really important, and maybe that leads you into a bit of a conversation around government. And, the work that we do at Catalyst is very much focused on driving change within organizations versus lobbying government. So I just want to be sort of upfront about that. But that being said, I think there's so many things that policymakers could consider doing in order to help women. And those could be things like, the resources that you're mentioning, like paid sick days, higher wages, better social and income supports, and flexibility in the workplace. And of course, affordable childcare would help more lower earning individual mothers to get back to work as well at this time.
Okay, I appreciate you, shining some light with, with regards to sort of where your specific efforts lie. So let's talk to corporate leaders. And when I say corporate leaders, I don't just mean CEOs. I'm not just talking about Fortune 500 companies. Employers with 5 employees or with 20 or whatever the case may be. The 1991 statistic you shared with us is, quite frankly, shocking. Or maybe for some people like yourself, you go, it's actually not a surprise at all if you pay closer attention, which would be a fair comment. But I think what it can serve to do is light a fire under people with regards to awareness. I would have assumed over the last 30 years that there would have been improvements, pandemic or not. But it sure reiterates to us that there's a long way to go. And while there may have been movement on some files, it sure doesn't sound like there's been significant movement on this one. So specifically, what are a couple of things that need to happen regardless of the size of the company or the industry?
Sure. So, I do want to say that there has been progress for women over the last several decades. So I don't want us to lose sight of that. But I think it's important to share that, the pandemic in particular has really set women back by decades. And so that's quite devastating, really. And there's a lot of work that now needs to be done. A few of the things that organizations can do. First of all, adopt flex time or access to remote work options. Now, this, of course, I recognize is not going to be the case in every single industry and sector. Manufacturing, that's going to be harder, for example. Where we have field operations, that's going to be a tougher thing to do. But where there are opportunities, we know that access to remote work options actually helps to mitigate or address burnout, which is really prevalent right now in the workplace. Build more inclusive cultures. So when we talk about an inclusive culture, that's a place where, I touched on it earlier, but it's a place where people feel valued, They feel trusted by their leaders. They feel that they can be authentic and show up as who they are, with all of the aspects of themselves that are different or unique from others. And they experience what we call psychological safety, where they feel that they can take risks, and they also feel that they may be able to make a misstep or a mistake and not be unduly punished or penalized for it. So leaders and organizations at large need to be focused on creating these cultures of inclusion. And in order to do that, we need to actually help our people and help leaders. And by this, I don't mean necessarily the C-suite leader at the top and only them. I mean, absolutely everyone. Each and every one of us can learn to show up as an inclusive leader. And so that's where we are demonstrating behaviors like holding ourselves and others accountable, providing ownership to people of their work. And that you can think of that almost as the opposite of micromanaging, letting your people go out there and thrive and do the work that they're capable of doing. Also demonstrating allyship. So showing up for others and maybe amplifying the messages of others, particularly those from underrepresented groups. Also, there's behaviors that are really focused on we refer to them as those behaviors we're leading outward that I just mentioned, but there's also behaviors that are focused on leading inward, where we're sort of holding a mirror up to ourselves and asking ourselves, am I showing up as the leader that I want to or that I need to? And those behaviors are demonstrating curiosity. So inquiring across our differences. We encounter individuals all day long that are different from ourselves, from unique backgrounds, and have different intersecting identities. So let's pause and ask questions. How does someone experience the workplace who is different from ourselves? We also want to be demonstrating humility and to be able to say, here's a place where I had a misstep or a mistake, or here's where I could do better, and own that and be able to talk about that and communicate it with others. And then lastly, being able to demonstrate courage. And I think there's been a lot of pressure on leaders over this last 18 months to really be demonstrating that courage when it comes to speaking up when we see something that's not right. And again, I think that courage and humility, they go together, because we're not always going to get it right. And we need to be able to stand up and say, hey, you know what? I got it wrong that time, but I'm going to do better the next time around.
Vandana, are you talking to us from Ontario? Is that where you are right now?
Yes, I am.
Do you have, or does Catalyst have data with regards to maybe disproportionate effects on women in the workplace based on provincial childcare structures? I mean, did childcare resources, for example, in Quebec, were women, potentially in the workforce more secure with regards to stability there than other provinces? Were you able to break that down?
That's something that I could probably come back to you with, but I see where you're
It'd be interesting to
know.
Of course. Yeah, I'd be curious to know that. I'd also, we talk about these. People are speculating about what the workplace of not just the now, what the workplace of the future looks like, and what we've learned from COVID. And of course, we see a lot of companies. Anybody that looks at any downtown skyline, I don't know about Toronto, but certainly in Calgary, it's very evident. And in other cities across the country, there's a lot of lights turned off in a lot of the towers. And you talk to anybody in commercial real estate, and they'll let you know that a lot of companies are insisting that their leases be renegotiated. People are taking less square footage. There's more of a hybrid workplace, even an expectation of such. I have to assume that may be one of your concerns moving forward with regards to, again, women being affected by those trends. Am I correct?
I would say yes and no, actually. You're mentioning hybrid work. So first of all, on the skyline piece, definitely, seeing something similar here in Toronto or just outside of Toronto. I also, my first job out of university was in Vancouver, working for a forestry company. I know, I sort of keep in touch with, what's happening in the market there. And I've definitely heard similar feedback from Vancouver as an example. And when we look at hybrid, there's benefits, and there can also be areas for concern or areas for us to consider and make sure that we're being more inclusive around hybrid. So first of all, having the option for flex is absolutely 100% beneficial for women. If you consider organizations that have flex time, especially for employees with dependent children, with elder care responsibilities, that's really critical. And to be able to offer that without career penalties is really important. Now, I've heard differing views on hybrid, and our research at Catalyst, as I mentioned, really definitely shows that having options for remote work, for example, that's an opportunity to mitigate burnout. So there are benefits. But I've also seen arguments recently. I think there was something in the Globe and Mail last month that touched on hybrid work potentially being the next career killer for women. And I thought it was interesting because it was raising an important point, but it also raises an opportunity for employers. So if you think about, having a workplace where some people are showing up in person at this time and some people are showing up by working from home or continuing to work from home if they have had the opportunity or the privilege to do so over the last year and a half, people are showing up to the workplace then in different ways, and different dynamics are being created. So if you've got sort of the group who's coming into the office regularly, who's now sort of finding those opportunities to connect, to engage, to build some, collaboration with their peers and get some of that social interaction that they may have been missing out on, we need to make sure that there's opportunities to continue to connect the whole team and to not let those who are taking advantage of having, and I mean taking advantage in a positive way, who are taking those opportunities to work at home, we don't want that to have a negative impact on women's careers. So, when you think of hot jobs, as we refer to them at Catalyst, those are mission critical roles. They have greater P&L responsibility. They're highly visible. They're bigger files, and all of those great things that come with good opportunities. We have to be careful that we're not providing those opportunities just to those individuals that we're seeing face to face, right? It's about flex time and what we provide as a work product. It's not about just the face time. And so we have to make sure that when we're thinking about things like career pathing or succession planning or promotion opportunities, that we're not just thinking about the people who are in front of us face to face, that we're taking into account our whole team as a whole. And as leaders, there's an opportunity and a responsibility to be bringing people together.
Vandana Juneja is Executive Director for Catalyst in Canada, workplace equity expert. You can learn more about what they do at catalyst.org and follow them on Twitter at Catalyst Inc. Thanks so much for your insight today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Real Talkers, you can let me know more about your personal stories. This is great. Always appreciate the live chat. If this is something you sit with for a little bit and feel like hammering out an email to us, maybe provide some context, let us know maybe something your company's been doing that you feel has been holding you back, or maybe something that's been providing an equitable workplace, maybe a step that you took as an employer, or maybe something your employer did for you as an employee, whether it's company policy, whether it's something they said. We'd love to hear from you. Talk at ryanjesperson.com. That culture conversation is such an important one. I was talking to a business leader just the other day, and he said that there's research that shows I shouldn't even say this on the show. I should keep it in my back pocket so I can deploy it to Sarah and Sam and the rest of our team here. But he said that there's research that shows that the most powerful, the most impactful thing that someone can say to another person in a moment to bring out the best in them is, "I believe in you." So what has your employer done to show you, or what have you done as an employer, a business leader, maybe a corporate leader, a community leader, to show that you believe in someone, that you empower them, you will take steps to empower them and provide an equitable scenario? We'd love to hear from you. Of course, it is Election Day here. We should mention as well, former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell announced just early this morning, passing away at 84 years of age due to complications from COVID-19. He was vaccinated, and of course, many people throughout the day, depending on when you're listening to this, you will have likely already heard comments from past American presidents, international leaders, and the like. The first Black American Secretary of State, And of course, we've been hearing from presidents throughout this morning talking about Cole and Powell. You can let us know your thoughts on that. And it is election day in our home province of Alberta. That includes a couple of referendum questions, and then depending on where you're at as well, other questions including fluoride in the water in Calgary. They're Alberta's Senate elections. People will be running for Senate nominations. I don't know why you're laughing, Hoyles. Is it maybe because that's not a thing?
It's not a thing.
It's not a thing. But that doesn't mean that there aren't
put
people.
it on.
It doesn't mean you can't put it on the ballot. And I know that there are people that have been running campaigns over the past number of months. They want to be Alberta's next elected senator or senators. And so you can share your thoughts on that. S. McFury says to us, they ask every person you come across today, did you vote? And if not, please allow me to help you locate a polling station. Gina says, I don't know what to do with those Senate votes. I mean, do you leave it blank? Stelly Z chiming in says, regarding the referendum question on daylight saving time, I don't want a 10 a.m. sunrise in the winter. So it sounds to me like Stelly will be voting no. Hope says that she voted no on the equalization question, says it's too bad that most people don't really understand equalization, don't understand. They have no clue that we don't send a big fat check to the feds. If you feel like you have a few questions about equalization, if you'd like, we've made it easy for you. You can go back to our Friday show, October 8th, an Athabasca University professor that kind of laid it all out for us. What did he call it? He called it political saber rattling, I believe. Some random guy says until permanent standard time is on the ballot, I'm not voting for permanent daylight, so that'll be another no vote there. Brenda says this is so confusing. Many people I've spoken with have said that these referendum questions should be written more clearly. Nicole says, I can't believe the amount of people that are not thinking past their own nose on the time change question. Adventure Cycling says, no chance I want the sun coming up at 9:30 a.m. no matter when it is. Karen says there should have been 3 options. Stay with changing the time back and forth, adopt permanent daylight saving time, or permanent standard time. Kathy says, I'm voting no to both questions. If the clock change question had been for standard time, then I may consider it more. Yeah, fair. Sean says, I agree we shouldn't change, but it's funny when the NDP and the United Conservatives polled the public on this, the majority said move to daylight saving time. I find it funny now, says Sean, when faced with a vote, people seem to be changing their minds. Tracy says the question with all of this is, what will the Premier do if the end result of the equalization question is a no? If a majority of Albertans say no on equalization? You know, we've been telling Premier for a year or two now that we're unhappy and he's not listening. I find it interesting. Something that's pretty interesting right now is that the government's been hanging on to this investigation, this final report out of Calgary on the foreign campaign. You remember this investigation into foreign campaigns to landlock Alberta oil. And, this has been going on for a while. The government's had it in-house for more than 2 months. The results have not been released. And I think a lot of people are asking very fair questions around why you would not release the findings of that multi-million-dollar report, the Steve Allen inquiry, before Albertans vote on equalization. Is there something going on there? Maybe. Jordan says, I don't want permanent daylight saving time. I also don't want to give this government anything else to do, quite frankly, because I don't feel like they're getting anything right. Kathy says there, maybe things that need to be tweaked in the equalization formula, but it shouldn't be scrapped. How about this from Tracy, who changed her mind, says I would have voted yes to permanent daylight saving time before I actually read more about it, read more information about it. That's an interesting comment right there. Really interesting comment right there. When he says, what message are we sending with this equalization question? A big pouty face? Albertans have to get over the National Energy Program and this Trudeau hate already. It was 40 years ago. I saw the Orphan Wells big daddy, W. Brett Wilson, out of Calgary the other day, supporting Pierre Elliott Trudeau's national energy program. Now, not in so many words, but he was talking about how, this is one of the laziest arguments that you'll ever see anybody make in support of Canadian oil. Talking about Eastern Canada. And it's true, importing millions and millions of barrels of foreign oil. We use that word foreign oil. Saying that we should be going to Canadian oil reserves. We should be using Canada's natural resources, not importing foreign oil. What Brett Wilson's talking about in theory is like a national energy program. What he's also implying is that the federal government should be telling private businesses, or publicly traded, but you get the idea, non-crown corporations like Irving Oil in Eastern Canada, where they can and cannot get their supply. Kind of like socialism or communism, or pick the ism you want to use. Brett Wilson believes that the federal government should be telling these big businesses where they can get their oil. So I'm not sure that he's thought that one through.
What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
It's good for Brett, right? It's good for Brett. In just a second, we're going to learn a little bit more about what's going on in New Brunswick in particular. That province saying, listen, we can only use ancestral acknowledgements now, approved by the provincial government's protocol office. No more land acknowledgements. We're going to find out why and what it means. We'll take a look at who is integrating land acknowledgements, and I suspect that Real Talkers will have a lot to say on this. You can shine some light for us on when you hear them, when you're seeing them, where you're not, and whether or not that surprises you. Before we go any further, I want to remind you quickly that you have a choice where you get your internet, electricity, and natural gas. It's a free market. And so why not choose the company, the friendly local utilities provider that supports your favorite show? We're proud to partner with Park Power. And it's never been easier to bring your business over to them. It's because their team does all the work for you. You can find all the details at parkpower.ca. Had somebody reach out to us, send us an email the other day and said, what's that promo code again? Well, it's 2021-Real Talk. When you go to parkpower.ca, bring your business over to them using the promo code 2021-Real Talk. They'll give you $70 off your first bill. Also wanted to give a big shout out. We mentioned that insight we gleaned on equalization from Athabasca University, the Brain Trust there. Of course, they've got professors, associate professors, lecturers, experts in all kinds of fields. They're Canada's online university. And one of the things that the thousands of students at Athabasca University love is that it is customized to your schedule. You've got 40 hours in a week that you want to pour into your studies, you go for it. You need to take a week off because life happens. It's no problem. These are customized classes, programs, and courses online that offer you the flexibility to learn at your own pace, and you can learn more at athabascau.ca. Finally, if it's time to upgrade your watch, maybe your tablet, or maybe your iPhone, the team at Westworld Computers is ready to hook you up. That's right, the new iPhone 13, the iPhone 13 Pro and Pro Max, plus the Series 7 Apple Watch are ready to go. You can learn more about it at westworld.ca. Don't forget, you can also book your service appointment there. Westworld Computers has been family-owned for more than 40 years. They are your Apple experts. Well, this was a really interesting story just last Thursday. It was October 13th when New Brunswick's Attorney General, Ted Fleming, issued a memo. It was a directive, in fact, saying that government employees must only use ancestral acknowledgements approved by the provincial government's protocol office. The Attorney General said, as a matter of fact, that New Brunswick was forced to take this position. It's a claim that's been filed by First Nation alleging the province is not upholding the peace and friendship treaties that were signed in territories that are now Maine, New Hampshire, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Now, this is all around whether or not land is unceded. or not. In our home province, you may know that Alberta's government stopped using a land acknowledgement in May of 2019. Now, other private businesses are using them. I host events professionally. You likely know we often integrate land acknowledgements into the opening remarks. So when do they fit? When do they not? Why are they important? I'm grateful that Michelle Robinson has agreed to join us this morning. Michelle is a land acknowledgement consultant, and she teaches organizations and companies how to develop these, and she consults in building Indigenous inclusive policies. You may know her from her weekly podcast, The Native Calgarian, making her Real Talk debut. Michelle, it's great to have you here. Thanks for making time for us.
I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you to your team and for reaching out. I'm really happy to talk about this issue. I think it is sorely needed to talk about. So,
can we talk about the history of land acknowledgements? I mean, there are acknowledgements of First Nations, of people that have lived, and of course, I mean, for thousands of years across territories. It's an understanding of our collective history. Obviously, I think it's a reflection of, in some cases, efforts for reconciliation. But what do we know about land acknowledgements? When did they first start appearing, and why do you think that they're so important?
So traditionally, our people used to do very extensive acknowledgement of the land whenever they went to visiting territories. And that's how they introduced themselves. They had ceremony, and there was a process. And it's a natural law, really. You walk into somebody's territory, I mean, if I were to come to your house, I'd knock on the door, introduce myself, say hello. And if you invited me in, we build up a friendship so that you felt comfortable with us becoming neighbors, or however that worked. That has been traditional for thousands of years between the various different nations. So when the king came from actually Britain, they had the Royal Proclamation. And this Royal Proclamation from the 1700s is actually part of our Truth and Reconciliation Commission report calls to action 45 and 46, because for whatever reason, the Crown thought, we could do this nation to nation work. And I think we've seen with all of the issues that we have between Indigenous and non-Indigenous that we've not really fulfilled our treaties. So, and I would say I was born and raised in Alberta, and I never heard land acknowledgements done until more recently. And I actually heard them from out east. It was the arts community that started doing it out east, and then I heard it more in Alberta, a little more in the arts community. And then eventually people started to understand the gravity of needing to do this regularly. So that's my understanding of it. But I mean, honestly, there's so much to really unpack, and I'm doing a disservice even trying to encapsulate that.
Well, and can I acknowledge that I think that we probably, I mean, this is going to be two people's opinions. Obviously, I would suggest that your opinion is certainly an informed one, and I know that you have a lot of background and awareness. You've worked in this field, and that's why we're grateful for your perspective. But not everyone, including First Nations across Canada, not everybody's going to agree on land acknowledgements, when they're appropriate, what they should acknowledge, et cetera. Have you been paying very close attention to the story out of New Brunswick?
Yeah, I've been following that because I think it's relevant to the work that we're trying to do. And we're in a time of reconciliation, or so-called reconciliation. And how are we going to have any reconciliation if we don't have mutual respect for each other? And all of the treaties actually started with that mutual respect, and we've never honored the treaties, which is why, of course, moving forward, that seems to be the fundamental part of even starting a relationship with reconciliation. It's acknowledging that we haven't done that work properly from the beginning of the first treaty that we ever signed. And so to me, land acknowledgements are incredibly important for that, as well as I think most people are unaware what the Indian Act really is, and it displaced our people onto these small little parcels of land and took away our traditional territories. So I think that there's a real, when you start unpacking all of the issues that we have in Canada, I think this is the fundamentals, the basics of it, that of course then led to the Indian residential school, land clearing policies. There's so much to unpack there was a pass system at one point in time where, as an Indigenous person, if I didn't have it on me, I would be thrown into jail. I had to get permission from the Indian agent in order to even leave my allotted reserve that they imposed on us. So, there's so much to unpack here, and that's not even including the Métis. They have, the older people call them road allowance people because they were pushed off of their lands, and the only place that they went was the road allowances. And I think in retrospect, I've seen a lot of older people go, oh, yeah, that's what we called them, and realized that was wrong then, and it's still wrong today. They also had land script that was given to them that was taken away. So there's so much to unpack with the problems of land displacement here in Canada when it came to the settlers and the Indigenous populations.
I really appreciate this comment from Jerry. She's watching us live right now on YouTube. She says, I'm really excited to hear Michelle on the show. She says, I've just posted on our nonprofit's Instagram page about the importance of land acknowledgements. She says, I'm certainly going to be sharing this interview in our stories later today. Jerry, we thank you for that. Tanya and Randy have both tapped into something. I didn't want to ask you this question as the first question, but I think it's a really important one. And it's around the performative element, or at least the risk of portraying some sort of a performative element. You're nodding your head already. Randy Thunderhorse says, I find land acknowledgements to be insincere and to be done only to appease settler guilt. Tanya says, I sure appreciate this guest. We worry that these acknowledgements are at risk of becoming performative and losing their meaning. And I'm interested to see what she suggests there.
Yeah. So what I tell people is that as they develop their land acknowledgement, first and foremost, allow it to evolve, let it be a living document, because I think it's really important that everybody talks to the elders of the land. And as they learn pieces of their stories, they can incorporate it into their land acknowledgements. As to the point about it being performative, absolutely it is. I think that if you talk to the average Canadian, they don't know anything about land acknowledgements. And I didn't even want to be teaching about land acknowledgements, but I had to, because there was such a huge gap. Of course, our education system doesn't teach it. Our universities try to give an overall comprehensive history of Indigenous people in general, but there's a real need. And I don't understand why this isn't more available, because, especially in Alberta, being born and raised here, I used to draft wells, pipelines, access right-of-ways, all these things to, try to encourage our industry to do this work on the land, and yet we haven't had real conversations about equity, sharing of resources, all of those conversations, and ultimately it's stolen land too. So the land back movement itself has been talking about that. 80% of the Crown owns the land, when our people were displaced onto these small parcels when we could be using more of the land. All of our national parks we were forced away from, and we haven't been allowed to be taking care of that land. So reconciliation is bigger than just acknowledging Indian residential school to a lot of Indigenous people. I mean, if you don't have clean drinking water, if you can't use your traditional lands, if you're experiencing racism everywhere that you go, these are real issues that we need to address. And of course, the land is a fundamental part of it. Usually when I come onto a show, I'll say, Oki, Nagana go, Meko che, Chestakom Aki. And that's the Blackfoot language, attempted, my apologies to Blackfoot language keepers that I mispronounced that, but I attempted to say, hi, my name's Red Thunder Woman. And I do that to honor them, to honor the fact I'm on their land. I'm Satu Dene. So my mom came from way up north. Our band is Yellowknife, but we come from either further north than that. And she came here just like most urban population does. And to even with the land acknowledgements, I see that there's a lot of exclusion from the visiting nations. There's not the inclusion of understanding. There's a lot of non-status. There's so much to really unpack there. So when it comes to performative, absolutely, I'd love for all Canadians to learn about it. That's why I do this teaching, and I'd be happy to do that with anyone. But for Indigenous, of course, it's free, so that we can just talk about it and unpack it and talk about call to action, 45, 46, the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People. There's so much to unpack with that. And I think it's important. And I can tell you as a drafter, we did not even show Indian residential schools or Indian reserves unless it was through a Canadian land surveyor. So that was a different jurisdiction than an Alberta land surveyor. So it's really quite interesting the more you unpack what hasn't been taught, despite it being industry norms, it needs to be included, and our industry needs it so much.
When Alberta, it's like the more you talk, the more questions I have. This is I love when interviews go like this. But I'm watching the clock. I'm going, we might need her to stay a little bit into overtime here. But when Alberta on policy. The Alberta government stopped integrating land acknowledgement into events or into statements, etc., stopped using them in May of 2019. What message do you think that sent, if any?
Oh, it sent a clear message, and it's that we don't respect Indigenous rights. And I mean, I knew that when he was federal from the work, and I mean, they literally launched the I Don't Know More movement because they didn't respect jurisdiction of Indigenous in any capacity. So I wasn't surprised to see that, and I'm not surprised to see it continue. And I'm not surprised that every policy that seems to come out seems to be against our community in some capacity from this current government. So a little bit of transparency. I did run against them because I knew this, and I was hoping that we could make some serious changes, and that Canadians, Albertans specifically, were really serious about reconciliation and would make, have Indigenous people at the table just to start doing that work. And I'm seeing other ways. I've seen a really great op-ed about the Senate being replaced with only Indigenous people. And I thought, well, that would at least be more respectful to the equality we were supposed to have as a nation when we first started building. So there's lots of options. It's just a matter of seeing leadership from Canadians wanting to include Indigenous people. And we're just going to see this until we've had land claim lawsuits for quite some time. And that was when we were allowed to start having land claim lawsuits. It was actually illegal for us to have legal representation up until about the 50s. So, we have a lot of problems in Canada when it comes to inequality and structural racism that's caused the issues we see today.
Real talkers may remember a recent conversation with Negon Sinclair just a short while ago where he touched on that, the idea of an Indigenous Senate. Chris Henderson, chief strategist at Y Station, one of our partners, has also talked about that. I think it's a fascinating thought exercise, but it's one of these more when people look, I think, more for like tangible, doable things. In the context of reconciliation, we're talking here about land acknowledgements. People are wondering, I mean, what do you do with Sir John A. Macdonald statues? What do you do with neighborhoods named after Catholic bishops and priests and involved in the residential school system? We've seen neighborhoods changing their names. We've seen schools with the names changed there. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for Canadians and Indigenous people in Canada to start having these conversations about what reconciliation really looks like. One of the goals of this show is, I think, we really want to equip people with a true understanding of these issues. And so, Michelle, I want to circle back. You've said a couple of times that the spirit of the treaties has not been honored and has not been respected. And I would love, and this may be obvious, but I don't think for everybody, if you could give us a couple examples of what you mean. So when people that listen to this show or watch this show are talking to their friends and are influencing their circle, if someone says, well, what do you mean the treaties haven't been respected, the spirit of the treaties? What do you mean?
Okay, so here in Alberta, we have treaties 6, 7, 8, and a little bit of 4 and a little bit of 10. And most people don't even know that. And that's, we talk about Alberta curriculum. That should be fundamental. It should be on all of our maps. Just like when I go into, a county of Vulcan or such, there's a sign that says, welcome to County of Vulcan, or thank you for visiting. Why don't we have boundaries to acknowledge treaty? And I know why. And that purpose is to erase Indigenous people in the hopes that Canada can just take over the country without, acknowledging its wrongdoings, actually. So, to me, I think that's fundamentals, where you have to know what treaty land that you're on. The government has that. There's a course out of the U of A that talks about Indigenous peoples, so that the knowledge is there. It's free, and I encourage people to take that if they don't really know what I'm talking about. And there's also post Confederation treaties, there's pre-Confederation treaties, there's the numbered treaties, and then there's the land claim settlements that are continuing and ongoing. And I want to give a shout out to the Indigenous folks that are constantly going through this. Like, these land claims are multi-generational, so we will have folks that will be working on the same land claim and then have to pass the torch to a new generation on that same land claim. So we have some that are hundreds of years old that still haven't been rectified because the courts won't allow Indigenous claims in the courts. There's a certain number, and this is, we claim to be a country about human rights, and we won't honor the very people that were originally here. So I have so much I could say. I just don't even know where to start, Ryan.
Trust me, I feel the same way sometimes in conversations like this. I think we just keep letting it flow. We got a couple of coffees here. We just let it flow. I mean, gosh, you and I could talk about the land back movement for an hour or for a week, right? I mean, even that, I think I see it come up in conversation. I'm not sure that the average Canadian, myself included, truly understands what the implication is. I heard a couple of my friends in good faith having a conversation about it a few weeks ago, and one of them was exploring the idea of land back, and the other said, "Well, then why don't you go first? Why don't you give your property back? Why don't you go first? Why don't you be the first one?" And I sat there and I went, I'm not sure I'm not sure about if that's really the spirit of, but what are we talking about?
Sure. I think a lot of folks are in the industry know that in order to develop wells, that they have to go to the Crown and get permits, et cetera, et cetera. Well, why does the Crown own most of that land when they're not sharing with the Indigenous people? Like, that's the easiest way to start with this land back conversation, is that you have stolen land is the only way to say it. And I was going to try to avoid it in order to not turn off some of your viewers. But
don't worry about that.
Ultimately, the land is stolen. And if we're going to be honest, why are we putting Cree in these small, tiny reserves when that whole northern part of Alberta really should be the place that they're allowed to hunt, fish, live, and explore? And we actually don't have that right to go do that right now. And I think that folks, well, they think Indigenous people get everything. We don't. And in fact, the opposite. When people say that, what that says to me, that they've fallen for propaganda. And that propaganda is there on purpose to try to erase our sovereignty, erase our rights, erase the treaties, and erase the inherent rights that we have as Indigenous people. So there's that conversation that we need to understand, that land back. I'm not going to steal somebody's land. But at the same time, if they are so unwilling to work with us, at what point in time do we say, I don't care if you paid a mortgage for years? We didn't have mortgages. You brought that with your Western economy. So, too bad for you and your generations that you paid for that. But I'm not going to go kicking off people off their farm right now when there's 80% of the Crown land that could easily be shared properly with the Indigenous people, and seeing us as a shareholder, a stakeholder that's 50% of the decision-making process. And that's what scares people. That's why the Conservative governments are afraid to do land acknowledgements, because they know, and it's really pathetic actually of the Albertans who want to separate. They don't know that if they were to separate, all of that land would become Indigenous 100%. So, that's the legal framework that we have right now. And if we're going to be moving forward, we have to start understanding this together, because I don't want to see, people separating and not getting, Canadian jurisdiction. It's actually impossible. That is an impossibility. So unless they want to just give 100% of the rights and title back to Indigenous people. And I'm not seeing that conversation in those folks that are saying, let's separate. So that bigger picture, Ryan, you spoke about wanting tangible things. Honestly, reconciliation is everywhere. And I think that, your producers had wrote me and they said, but The Edmonton Oilers has a land acknowledgement. And I think that I'm sad that that's what it's going to take for our government to change, is that they're going to have to see it from private industry. They're going to have to see it from all of the sports clubs, all of the folks that are willing to do this land acknowledgement, and then basically be pressured into it so that we can start moving forward. Government moves at the speed of a turtle. So I think that the rest of us can do that work. And, I've seen a lot of folks that are just regular Canadians wanting to do what's tangible for this. And first thing I tell them, land acknowledgements, it's the first thing you can do. Then start reading about Indigenous people, because like a lot of us don't have the time to do a lot of work, but you devote an hour to Indigenous content a week, and before you know it, you are starting to understand the issues a lot more.
That Oilers land acknowledgement is interesting. I know that this sounds gauche to put it this way, but I know that it played very well with the crowd in attendance at the season opener. People indicated their, do I say approval of it, or maybe their appreciation of it when it rolled. I mean, I hosted the game when the Edmonton Oilers opened Rogers Place, which, I guess that was 4 years ago. And there was anybody that was there will remember that there was a very significant Indigenous element to the so-called opening ceremony, including a drum circle and First Nation leaders, including chiefs that were in attendance. And it was I think, a very powerful statement. And I think the team deserves some credit for that. What sort of an impact does that have? With regards to, the Oilers are the biggest brand in Edmonton, period. So what impact does that have?
Yeah, it's huge. And I think my late uncle was actually there, Fred Sassakamoose, and just going to do a plug for his book right now. So, that bigger picture that, I literally had family there, and I'm a diehard Flames fan. I don't know why. My family is very, embarrassed by that on a regular basis. But, for me, it's really incredible to see that Indigenous inclusion, and there are sports calls to action. This is such simple work to do, to include Indigenous people and acknowledge us as neighbors. I mean, we do that for every other community, and I don't understand. Well, I know why. The sooner we erase the Indigenous community, the sooner that people feel legitimate in the place of Canada. And that's number one reason why we need land acknowledgements. But two, it wouldn't have to be this way if we would have just had equality to begin with. Indigenous, we don't necessarily own the land in the same way that a settler or Canadian would think in owning the land. We see ourselves as stewardships to it. So, that bigger picture that we could have worked together, but instead, Canadians and settlers took that as we can own the land and just push people off. And that's not what is happening. So when we see, folks like the Edmonton Oilers do this work, it's really important to signal, Canadians are shifting. And I think you spoke about that land acknowledgement last night, and the Oilers had done. I think there's a bigger picture now that the 215 bodies were found, that people recognize we've really messed up this history. We've really messed up, and we have to make amends in a better way. And we've given the guidelines. We gave the guidelines in 1996, actually, as a royal. I'm getting the Royal Proclamation mixed up with the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. And that was done in 1996. Now we have 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. And there's actually now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. So the guidelines are there. It's not like we don't come to the table with solutions. And my hope is that people will start finding one of those things that they know is for them, that is tangible, that they can start working on, because there is so much we can do. And for folks who have influence in their companies, maybe community associations or sports clubs, these are things that we can incorporate quite easily and start on a better relationship together. But that bigger picture too, that because of the racism and marginalization and barriers Indigenous face, having a recognition of that, and that makes it more inclusive for our youth that are trying to come up and, live, work, play in these communities as well.
I know that people are having the conversations around reconciliation across Canada. Obviously, I just about 8 hours ago got back from the South Gulf Islands, in BC, and we're driving. It's just a beautiful part of the country, and driving on these islands and seeing the imagery. There's obviously a huge Indigenous presence and rich Indigenous history in that part of Canada. There were orange shirts, orange flags on private properties, spotting the island that I was able to see, which is very powerful. Of course, a little bit north from there, relatively recently, the Queen Charlotte Islands. Canadians were reminded that region has been known as Haida Gwaii for quite some time, and it's always interesting for me. And I think that travel is so important, to say the least. And I'm just talking about going one province over. But it's fascinating when you look back, and I don't think that we're far enough removed from it yet to truly process what happened in Canada 4 months ago. With that appalling, and I don't even want to use the word discovery, because it was not a discovery in a sense, it was a reminder outside that former Kamloops Indian Residential School of those 215 unmarked graves, and then Cowessess First Nation, and then the many others, and the numbers now in the thousands of children's graves. Survivors and Indigenous elders and storytellers were sharing this with Canadians. We're telling this, we're essentially screaming it for years. And for whatever reason, it didn't resonate until it did. And I think that we'll look back on that as sort of an awakening of sorts. It obviously begs the question of what the hell took so long. But I do feel that there's a different approach. Do you feel it too? I mean, you and I have different family backgrounds. We have different traditions, obviously. You and I both grew up in the same part of the country in different contexts, and have different perspectives gleaned from that. But I feel like there's more sincerity from people, and I feel like there's more of a sense of urgency. Not to be glib about this, but when you run into an old high school friend on the street and you go, we should get together. But it's like, you're like, we're not getting together. You just want to get out of the city. We should get together for sure. Send me an email. For sure, we'll get together. But now people are like, no, it actually has to, we got to do something. We've got to make this right, or at least do what we can to try to make this right. Do you feel that?
I do. I feel it really strong, because I think this generation and the next generations are a lot more serious about and understand that, we're not going to move forward unless we start dealing with this. So for me, huge shift in the conversation. Now, that said, I mean, I can tell you I experienced racism on Saturday when I was out and about. Yesterday, I just stayed at home with a migraine. Today, I'm going to be at home. But, we are starting to see some change, but there's so much anti-Indigenous bias, and it's taught through, these type of conservative governments that are like, we're not even going to do a land acknowledgements because we don't want to legitimize their position in any capacity. And our elders always warn us that, it comes in cycles, talking about Indigenous issues, and that we're at the top of the cycle. And the hope is that we will make some more strides in changing. And I think there is, because we have like all of these Indigenous lawyers that are coming up and making significant changes. And I think that the kids get it, like the youth get it. They want to make these changes right away. But as parents, are we still voting in people that are in denial of the issue of racism, the issue of Indigenous inclusion, Indigenous education? Today is a big day. And you talked earlier about changing names. And one of the initiatives that we have here, I run a book club, and a lot of the folks from that wanted to do something tangible, and something tangible was trying to get that Langevin name change done. So a lot of our group worked on that until they finally were shamed into changing the name. And that, of course, happened because of the rediscovery, the reminder of the bodies that were in one of the nations. And then, of course, as you said, they were coming around. That's a hard conversation for me, because I know when I've visited my granny's Indian residential school grounds, before TRC, they had a huge plaque with all of the names of people that had died. And, they have white rocks that you're supposed to walk in a path, because we know there are graves everywhere, but we didn't have the money, resources, and jurisdiction even to be doing that work. And that's another point I'd like to make. I tried to go to a local Indian residential school, the Dunbar, and the farmer wouldn't even let me on his grounds. And I know the Red Deer Industrial School grounds, which had one of the highest amount of children die, it's private farm now. And if there was a conversation to have about land back, I don't understand why anybody would want to be plowing over the graves of dead children. I can't comprehend it, and I don't know why that's perfectly allowed and acceptable in most of Western Alberta or Western Canada, and shouldn't be allowed anywhere. These should be memorial sites. And I'm sure anybody would be offended if I even suggested that we could go over to Europe and sell off some of the graves that our Canadian soldiers are under and allow farmers to plow over them now. I'm sure that would be very offensive to most people, but yet that's standard here in Canada.
I appreciate your candor. That just smacked me in the face, as it should. And these are the conversations we need to have. They're difficult ones, and that's the whole point. And I'm grateful for your insight. I'm looking forward already to our next conversation. We'll continue conversations. We have sort of like short and long-term planning with regards to editorial direction of this show, and we do intend to have more fulsome conversations about land back and what it means and what it entails and what's doable. Is there precedent set? And I'll look forward to welcoming you back to the show. I think we could have a pretty great panel discussion on that if you'd agree, Michelle. Thanks for your time this morning.
I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Ryan, for having me. I know I've seen some of amazing folks come on this show, so I'm really excited, and I appreciate that offer to come back, and I'd be honored to come back anytime I can. You
got it. We'll make it happen. You can subscribe to Red Thunder Woman, a.k.a. Michelle Robinson's weekly podcast, the Native Calgarian Podcast, and, of course, you can check it out at nativecalgarian.com. That's Michelle Robinson joining us live on Real Talk on this Monday morning. This feels like a sensible time. It feels like a perfect time to get into the results of our most recent question of the week. This was presented by our friends, our official research and strategy partners at Y Station. Still to come on the show today, judge from Canada's Drag Race, Brooke Lynn Hytes. Looking forward to that conversation in just a moment. But let's get into this. We asked you a while ago. Of course, it feels like a while ago as we had the week away from the studio. But in our most recent Get Real question of the week, we asked you how, if and how, you observed Canada's inaugural National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. We kept the survey open from October 4th through the 17th, right up until last night. And we appreciate the hundreds of you that completed those surveys online. If you support us on Patreon, number one, thank you. And number two, you've got the full top line report in your email inbox right now. So you can check that out. You can dig into the results. 14 pages worth of results sorted and put together by the team at Y Station. A real quick note, as mentioned, we'll launch our next question of the week tomorrow on Tuesday, once we know the results of Alberta's municipal elections. Sam, let's get into some of the notable results. Those of you that responded to our question of the week, 86% of you, 86% of respondents to our survey recognized the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Almost 9 out of 10, which I thought was pretty encouraging. 2 out of 3 of you, 67% of you, reported learning something new about residential schools, Indigenous culture, or perspectives. And I thought that was fantastic. I think that's pretty solid. 2 out of 3 respondents saying that they learned something new, which is kind of at least part of the whole point. Here's another interesting result from our survey. 89% of you, nearly 9 in 10 again, of Real Talkers believe that the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation should be a statutory holiday across the country, including in Alberta. Alberta, one of the jurisdictions that did not recognize it as a stat. And here's another interesting one. 47%, half of Real Talkers, 1 in 2, believe that elected leaders should only focus on issues of reconciliation for the duration of the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. That's one that I get hung up on a little bit because I think, just to be a bit of a details guy, I think oftentimes when it comes to leadership, there are requirements of leaders that may prompt them to step outside the context of any particular day. However, you've got to be very aware of how that plays publicly in the message that it sends. A classic example might be, and I know that some of you will roll your eyes at me bringing this up, but the Prime Minister and the Trudeau family's getaway to Tofino on September 30th, on that National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Some people said, well, the spirit of the day is for personal reflection, for introspection, and who's to say the Prime Minister is not doing that? Others are saying, would you be okay? And this was my position, to be honest, and I think it's very fair. I mean, you could poke a whole bunch of holes in the comparison, but for purposes of having this resonate with people, how would you feel about the Prime Minister and his family vacationing and walking on the beach in Tofino on Remembrance Day? And so I think when we go back to that question on whether or not elected political leaders should be focusing on anything else on that National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, if you were to ask the same question, should they focus on anything else on Remembrance Day, you'd probably get people feeling very strongly about that as well. Not to say that they abdicate their responsibilities, not to say that there aren't other things going on. But that was one of the interesting questions, and I wasn't surprised. I don't know about the two of you, Sam and Sarah, but I was not surprised to see the numbers dip there. You know, it was like 86% of people recognize the holiday. 89% of people believe that it should be a stat in every province, including Alberta. You know, 67% of people learned something. Well, 47% of people believe that elected officials should only focus on reconciliation on that day. I wasn't surprised to see the numbers drop a little bit lower there. It's not to say that it devalues the day or the purpose of the day, but I think that people may find some nuance in that with regards to practicalities like government operations. I mean, do you essentially want your federal government to take a day away from all other files to 100% focus on this? That's the question you ask people, right? And you got to ask people, I think, the same question about their own backyard. Did you take that day to focus solely on reconciliation? Or did you perhaps reflect on it for a moment and then move on to other things? Or did you perhaps reflect on it not at all? So it's the question we asked people. And we got some really interesting responses as well. I mean, there was a fairly heated conversation among Real Talkers, to be honest. I mean, we ask you to fill in the blanks on some of these. Some of you go through and you complete our question of the week in 1 minute, and that's totally great, and it's amazing, and we appreciate it. Others of you really take some time, and you write us these longer form, very thoughtful responses. And many of you felt that the Prime Minister made a mistake on that day, but a large number of you as well felt that Prime Minister Trudeau has done a lot with regards to Indigenous communities in Canada. And some of you told us that you believe that the national media took away from the day. In other words, coverage compromised the day with such a focus on what was happening in Tofino. So how did you recognize the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation? About 40% of you said that you watched or listened to a TV or radio special. Appreciate the literally thousands of you that downloaded our special edition episode on that September 30th day. You can still go back. It was a day full of wonderful conversations with Indigenous community leaders in many different jurisdictions, including Dr. James McCocas. What an amazing and powerful opening interview that was. I won't soon forget that. 20% of you said that you watched a speech or participated in a webinar in order to better educate yourselves. 15% of you said that you read a book or a story from an Indigenous author. 1 in 10 of you, 10%. And I think I'll include myself in this. I think we can do better. We can do better. 1 in 10 said that you read the TRC report on the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. I'd love to see that number be 50% or 75%, even if you've read it before, as a reminder of sorts. 1% of respondents took the day to read the report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. 1%. While 14% of you told us you did not recognize the National Day. Others of you said that you held a private family circle to remember and honor family members that survived residential schools. What about this? An audience member said you went to the Healing Garden in St. Albert and met up with a group of friends, including survivors, family members. You learned how that healing garden was created and some of the history between 1870 and 1963. Stood around in a circle, says this real talker, passing around tobacco and ultimately placing it in the middle of the circle with a prayer for those who were in those institutions, those who never made it home, those who are still suffering, those on the streets, those who suffer alone. You say it was a spontaneous circle of learning and love. That's amazing. Another one of you spoke with your 3-year-old to help him understand why he was wearing an orange shirt that day. One of you says, as a teacher, I learned more about artwork inspired by the residential school experience by artists Carrie Newman and Brianna Bear. Used these pieces of art in class to inspire students to create their own art that builds on the artist's ideas. Another one of you says, I worked that day. There wasn't a lot of time left in the day to do very much, but I did have intentional discussion with family members. When we asked what you learned, this was really interesting insight. One of you said you learned that we still have much to learn. That when it comes to a National Day for Reflection, this won't be a one and done type scenario. Reconciliation will take years, but the journey will be worth the destination. Another one of you says, I learned the story of Orange Shirt Day by listening to Real Talk. It was extremely powerful. The story offered further insight. Now, that was on our September 29th show. You said further insight into the pain and trauma, as well as the strength and resilience that residential school survivors have. I learned a lot about emotional connections and how there is still so much work left to do. We appreciate every moment that you take to chime in and to share your perspectives with regards to our question of the week. It gives us great insight into where the audience is at, where you'd like our content to go, the types of conversations you're eager to have on this program. And as mentioned, we'll launch our next question of the week. That'll be tomorrow, once we know the results of Alberta's municipal elections. Let me take a second to remind you that our friends of the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park are looking forward to Miracle Treat Day. It's coming up on Thursday, October 28th. That's 10 days from now, so mark your calendars. On that day, all Blizzard sale proceeds, not the profits, every single cent that they raise at the Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road are going to go to the Stollery Children's Hospital. The locations do take pre-orders, and they offer, get this, free delivery for larger orders. So if you work somewhere where there's 10 or 30 or 150 people, and you'd love to drop a Blizzard order on your workplace and make somebody's day, why not drop off Blizzard somewhere to show appreciation? You can mention Miracle Treat Day. You let them know you're a real talker, and the Dairy Queens at Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road will be happy to collaborate with you on a pre-ordered and delivered order of Blizzards. Our friends at Friesen Brothers also want to remind you that coming up November 1st is another 15% off day at their 16 locations across the province of Alberta. That's right, on the first day of every month from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Friesen Brothers offers 15% off every purchase over $75. Friesen Brothers, for more than 65 years, has been Alberta grown and Alberta owned. Well, the minute that Sarah Hoyles, the editorial producer of this show, announced that our next guest had confirmed an appearance on Real Talk, you all chimed. I mean, I don't know if we've seen an outpouring of excitement. People chiming in on how excited they were to see Real Talk welcome the so-called Queen of the North. You know them as a judge on Canada's Drag Race, as a runner-up, second finisher in the 11th season of RuPaul's Drag Race, Brooke Lynn Hytes, a.k.a. Brock Edward Hey-Ho, a Canadian drag queen, ballet dancer, performer, television personality, making his Real Talk debut. Welcome to the show, and thanks for making time for us this morning.
Oh my God, thank you for having me. That was quite the introduction. I don't know if I've ever been introduced with my full Christian name before. Brock Edward Hayho. You said the whole thing.
I love it. I love it. Well, I was telling these two that a former colleague of yours is a good friend of mine, Jeffrey Boyer Chapman, and I always say to Jeffrey, we go way back to Red Deer. He and my wife were high school friends, and so I've known Jeffrey for a long time. But I love it. I said that when you have the three names, like Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's just so much more powerful. It just infuses that celebrity aura. You know what I mean?
That's so true. That's so funny. I literally ran into Jeffrey in the washroom of LAX yesterday. Yesterday, I ran into him. And another funny story about Jeffrey, when I first met him on season 1 of Canada's Drag Race, I made the mistake of calling him Jeff at one point. And he stopped. He was like, it's Jeffrey. He was like, actually, you're the only person I will let call me Jeff, but nobody else is ever allowed to call me that. I was like, noted. So yeah. I just never called him that again either. I was like, I'm just going to leave it.
Yeah, that's right. That was, you two were dynamite together and had a real chemistry. I'm not going to make the interview about Jeffrey, but while we're talking about him, it was, I don't know if you want to dig into this or not, but there was a lot of real controversy. I know he pulled down his Twitter account based on a lot of the stuff that was going on. A lot of people were really tough on him for the personality that he was as part of the show. What was that like for you to experience and to see play out on a show that I know that for the most part people feel is a pretty positive show?
Completely. It was horrible. I felt so bad for him, and I got a little bit of backlash for the season as well, not nearly to the degree that he did, but it was really tough. But it kind of bonded us together a little bit because we would talk every week and kind of like help each other out. And I just think the way he handled it all was really, really classy. Like, he never got involved. He never clapped back. He kind of really just took the high road with it. But I know it was really tough for him, as it would be for anybody. And then also, if you put on top of that, we were in the middle, when the show was airing, we were in the middle of COVID. And then we were in the middle of that horrible election that was happening down here. So it was just like all of these things compounding on top of each other. And there was so much stress and tension in the air. It was tough, but yeah, he handled it like an absolute pro.
Are you in LA right now?
I am, and it's raining.
Well,
weird.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not giving. We're about to get like blizzard, as you know. For the next, you grew up in Toronto, right? So you've seen. Is that right? Toronto,
yeah.
I think? Yeah. So
yeah, Toronto.
You know, you've seen some gnarly weather before. I would take rain in LA.
Yeah.
I would take rain in LA any day. But
it's just weird. It never happens here.
the reason I wanted to make sure you're in California right now is to point out that we're talking right now at just after 10 o'clock Mountain Time. It's just after 9 o'clock Pacific. And I wondered, I said, when the shot comes up, when we take your shot live, am I going to see Brooke Lynn or am I going to see Brock? And I'm curious to know.
You get Brock.
You look, Brock, you look fabulous today. Your skin is glowing. Your hair looks great. But when Brooke Lynn Hytes hits that runway or takes to the television set, can you give us a sense of what goes in to not just the physical preparation, not just the hair and the makeup and the wardrobe, but I would imagine there's somewhat of you integrate into your character's mindset, or like what goes into becoming Brooke Lynn Hytes?
Oh my goodness, that is a loaded question. Well, a couple hours of hair and makeup for sure. I look, as you can see, this is me in my natural state. When I'm a boy, I like to be very relaxed. I like to be just very casual because when I'm in drag, it's so deeply uncomfortable that when I get to be just me, I just got to relax and just like breathe and let my body breathe. But there's so much preparation that goes into becoming me, especially for something like Canada's Drag Race, because I have to work with designers to create these looks, and you have to create the outfit, and then you have to figure out what hair you're going to wear with it. Then you have to figure out what accessories are going to go with it. And then you have to figure out what makeup concept you're going to do with it. So, and I do that all myself. Like I don't do the hair and makeup myself, but I am a part of the whole process. I have meetings with everybody and we just kind of figure it all out. And it's a lot of work. And you have to do that. I think I have 10 looks on the show, plus my promo look. So I had to come up with 11 different looks. And it's a large amount of work. And then once you get in drag, you're in drag and you're in drag all day because like I'm filming a show like this, it's a long process. And yeah, it's a lot, but it's really fun. It's really rewarding. But I think the kind of switch that happens, I don't know if I have like a personality switch when I'm in drag, but you definitely feel yourself. Like when you look good, you're just kind of like, oh, and you feel it. And I think my drag character is very intimidating. I get that a lot from people that I'm a large person. I'm 6'3" out of heels. So then you slap me in a pair of 5-inch heels and I'm a giant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what I try to channel and emulate always is I'm obsessed with like the 90s supermodels, that era of the glamazon. So that's really my gig. So when I'm walking that runway, I'm just trying to give you like a fierce. Can I swear on this show?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want. Great.
I'm a fierce bitch. Like I that's what I try to give you, and I try to eye fuck that camera.
Yeah.
When I'm walking that runway, usually you have to stare directly into its soul, and you just have to make love to it.
Yeah, eye fucking cameras is kind of, I think that's advice that spans beyond industries, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah,
you gotta eye fuck it.
Yeah, that's right. Did you? Because you have a storied history when it comes to your ballet career as well, right? You were at the at the National Ballet School of Canada. At what point did you take that ability as a performer and realize that you could channel it into other areas, including drag? Where did that happen?
Well, that happened kind of while I was at the ballet school. I think it was in my first or second year. I joined in grade 10 and I stayed till grade 12. And then I actually stayed 2 extra years after. They have a post-intensive dance program that you can take if you're not quite ready to become a professional dancer yet. But I think it was grade 10 or 11. A friend of mine showed me a DVD of Ballet Trocadero de Monte Carlo. And for those of you who don't know, that is an all-male ballet company that does the male and the female roles. And they dance on point. So it's basically like a drag queen ballet company. And that blew my mind. I had no idea that existed or that was even a thing. So, and I just saw it and I immediately was like, I want to do that. Like, that looks like something I would really enjoy, because I've never, even my whole ballet career, even when I was starting out, I honestly just had no interest in the male roles, the male steps. I wanted to be the swan. I wanted to be Princess Aurora. Like, I wanted to be the beautiful, like, ballerina. I wanted to be the ballerina. I never wanted to be the prince, did not care. And then I saw this and I was like, oh, this is a thing that I can actually do.
Yeah.
So that was in my, that's kind of when the seed was planted. And then, I actually, once I finished my post-intensive program in Toronto, I think it was about 20 years old, and I actually went and auditioned for the company in New York, and they loved me and they wanted to accept me. But unfortunately, because I had no professional experience, they said, go away, get a couple of years of professional experience in another dance company, just so for work visa sakes, because getting a work visa to the States is very hard if you have no professional experience. So they're like, go away, get some experience so we can build up your resume for your visa, and then we will hire you. So I ended up getting a job in Cape Town, South Africa, with Cape Town City Ballet. That was my first professional gig. And I moved down there and I was there for 2 years, when it was an amazing period in my life, but it was always in the back of my head. I was like, I need to get back to that company because that's where I belong. So after 2 years, I was like, knock, knock, knock. I have professional experience. Can I have a job now? And they hired me. I got my visa and I moved to New York, and I lived there for 4 years, and we toured all over the world, being as a drag ballerina. And it was really in that time period that I realized, like, yeah, I like ballet, but drag is my passion. And like, as the years went on, like, I kind of, and ballet hurts your body. It's not a nice art form on your body, as like any professional athlete will tell you. Like, it really takes a toll after a while. And we were dancing so much and my knees were going and I was just getting old and rickety. And I was like, well, I was like, I literally, everything just hurt all the time. And so I started falling out of love with ballet, and I was like, I don't want that to happen. And I really, really was enjoying the drag aspect of it. I saw more. So I was like, let me leave ballet behind for a second. Let me stop doing that professionally and let me try to make it professionally as a drag queen. And that's that's when I gave up my professional ballet career and I moved back to Toronto and I started doing drag. and the rest kind of just snowballed from there.
Brock, if you ever need to feel better about yourself, I'd invite you to come watch my men's league basketball team. We are old, and if anybody's old and rickety, I can barely walk for like 3 days after we play basketball. So I wouldn't feel. I've seen you on stage. I think you're doing just fine. I was telling Sarah before, producer here on the show, I said when we introduce you as the Queen of the North, I've got to be careful.
The so-called Queen of the North. The so-called
Queen of the North. That's right, because there are anti-monarchists that are, or perhaps even more specifically, monarchists that would really take issue with it. I once introduced the Princess of Canada on my show, and I faced major backlash. But in all seriousness, what does it mean? Like you are seen as right now, and I don't know if you're going to like the attention right now or not, or if you're going to like this proclamation, but essentially the Queen of the North. I mean, you're not the only drag queen in Canada. There are many talented ones. How did you become the cream that rose to the top? What was the secret of your success? What did you do differently?
Well, I think going back to my ballet career, I really set myself apart that way. I used my ballet training a lot in my drag numbers, especially when I competed in pageants and stuff. I would dance on point, and that was really not something that anybody else was doing at that time at the level that I was doing it. So I think that really set me apart immediately. And then I think I just worked really, really hard. Honestly, I worked so hard. I was so driven. I was so focused. I was so hungry for it. So I just really worked my ass off to get myself where I am. I knew what I wanted, and I just really, really went for it. So I think that might be the secret to my success. I'm also really big on being a professional. I mean, that's not a word you associate with drag queens a lot, but that has served me so well, because in my ballet career, I was drilled into us that, like, if you are on time, you are late. If you're 15 minutes early, you're on time. Like, I know how to work as a team. I know how to value other people's time. And I think that also has served me very well in my career, because, again, that's not something that happens a lot in the drag world. Drag queens are notoriously late for everything and kind of on their own time. And I was just always there, ready to go, ready to get the job done. And people took notice of that and would always hire me back for stuff. But yeah, I just think I worked really hard, and I guess I had a talent that I could monetize on.
Yeah. Well, and you sure have. You're essentially, you. I mean, you went from a contestant, right, on RuPaul's Drag Race to now the judge and host. I mean, $100,000 grand prize up for grab on Canada's Drag Race. I mean, it's amazing to see what that show, I mean, what RuPaul in particular in the franchise and the show has done for drag. Right? I mean, it's
incredible.
It's amazing. I think back to my high school days, or maybe just early in the university days, and I remember when it felt like, and this may also have something to do with growing up in somewhat of a conservative scenario in southern Alberta and all that kind of stuff too. I'll issue that caveat. But it felt sort of risque, right? Like to go to a drag show or to see drag queens at Pride, even 20 years ago, was like, whoa, right? And now it's just like mainstream. Do you think a big part of that is because of the show, because of RuPaul even?
That's the whole part of it. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, drag used to be underground. It was punk. It was taboo. It was all those things. And what RuPaul and RuPaul's Drag Race has done, it has made it mainstream. It has made it a bona fide industry. And it has just opened so many doors for all of us. And you're always going to get the people who are like, oh, drag used to be punk. It used to be underground. Yeah, it absolutely did. But we were also getting paid $25 for a booking, if anything. Like there was no way to really make an actual living off of it and make a career for yourself off of it. So we have RuPaul to entirely thank for that, because without that show, drag would still very much be an underground thing.
What do you think the future of drag looks like? If there's like a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or an 18-year-old that watches this interview, and of course there no doubt will be, what's your advice? I mean, you've had this phenomenal journey. And it's obviously there's been a lot of hustle and a lot of hard work. And you talked about how you're going out and getting that experience and circling back and creating a space for yourself, to a certain degree, manifesting some of your destiny. But what might be your advice to the aspiring queens?
I mean, my advice is well, it's hard now because there's so many drag queens, like especially with the creation of the show Drag, that has also created a whole new crop of drag queens. Everybody wants to be a drag queen now because they see the show and they're like, oh, I can get on this, I can be famous. So my best advice is always figure out what you do well and figure out how to capitalize on that. And figure out how you can make yourself unique, because at this point we have so many, and we don't need another Trixie Mattel. We don't need another Alyssa Edwards. We don't need another Katya. Like we want you. We want another individual. We want something we've never seen before. And that's a tricky thing to do, but it's a fun process to just kind of figure out how you can make yourself unique and stand out from the pack.
I have a question, and I'm not sure how to ask it without, I don't want to send the wrong message.
Okay.
But I'm looking at people follow you on Instagram. By the way, shout out to your Instagram profile photo. Every Child Matters. At B Hytes. That's BHYTES. 1.2 million followers. Obviously, an enormous following on Instagram. You're a Canadian talent that's living and working and making it in the United States. And I had an interesting conversation with a friend just yesterday as we acknowledged the 4-year anniversary of Gord Downey's passing. I can't believe it's been 4 years already. But it got us talking about Canadians, talented Canadians that have either made it in Canada or that have made it in the States or made it internationally. And I'm curious to know, you've obviously made it internationally. You have literally millions of fans. People follow your every move. People were thrilled that you're going to be here on this show. You're now hosting Canada's Drag Race. And I think some people will probably be like, yeah, but it's like the Canadian version. And you know how has that kind of a connotation that may be fair or may not be fair, but people talk about there's like a Canadian lens through which people see the arts. How do you, what would you say to people that would, I guess my question is, could you have made it, so to speak, had you stayed in Canada? Could you have made it like you have now had you stayed in Toronto?
I mean, I don't know if I could have. Like, the only reason I made it is because I left Canada. You know, like I got on the American version of the show, which then took me back to Canada. Yeah. But I mean, like, I guess I could have made it in a way. I don't think I could have made it as well. Like, I'm sure had I not moved to the States and then Canada's Drag Race would have inevitably happened with or without me. So I guess I wouldn't have been the host of the show. And then I would have been a contestant on the show, but then there already would have been a host of Canada's Drag Race. So it wouldn't have, I don't think it would have worked out as well, you know? Like, I think my journey worked out the exact way it was supposed to. And the thing about living in the States, being Canadian, I work a lot in Canada, but living in the States is just so much easier because I'm already a Canadian citizen. I could just go back up there and work, but I'm not. If I lived in Canada, it's a lot harder for me to work down in the States. You know what I mean? Yeah. With the visas and everything. So it just makes it's a lot easier for me to live down here right now.
Yeah. I mean, and not everybody can make it happen. And when you do, it's absolutely fantastic. Fantastic. Jill's watching today. How's this for a compliment? Jill says you're the only person she likes from Toronto, so that's kind of it's kind of a compliment. But
Thank you.
But the real compliment, she says, I tuned in, and I happen to know that Jill's from Montreal originally, by the way, and she says
that makes sense.
She says I tuned into one episode of Drag Race, and a few weeks later, I had watched several seasons, and I knew all the lingo. There's something about it, isn't there?
It's fun. It's just a kind of a great all-encompassing show. I mean, you get the drama, you get the transformation, you get like your heartstrings get pulled at, you laugh. Like, it really kind of has everything. It's a really, really fun show in terms of reality TV.
Well, we're thrilled that you were able to make time for us. Thank you so much, especially doing it an hour ahead of the time that the rest of us woke up. That's not lost on us, and we don't ignore that at all. People can follow you again on Instagram at B Hytes, on Twitter as well, B Hytes1. They can check out brooklynhytes.com, and of course they can catch you as the star. I know you'll deflect. Let me say one of the stars, but the star of Canada's Drag Race with a $100,000 grand prize up for grabs. Brooke Lynn Hytes.
Tax-free.
Tax-free.
Because we don't tax our prize money in Canada, so you actually get $100,000. And may I just say, you have an excellent voice.
Oh,
you have a great. Yeah, is this like your natural voice? Is this how you talk all the time?
Somebody asked me that last week. I did a speech at Lethbridge College, and they were like, "Is that the real voice, or is that a?"
Is that like how you order coffee? I'd like a double.
I guess it depends on, if I'm trying to impress them or not. I'd like a dark
I love it. I
roast.
think it's great.
I'd take my coffee, you know what I mean?
That was very sexy.
I don't mind having this conversation with you because you understand getting into character, popping in and out. I mean, you get all the, who knows? Maybe you'll find me in drag one of these days, Brooklyn. You could help me out. I'd be like 6'1" in heels. So I wouldn't have quite the same stature as you, but if I was looking for tips, I'd know where to go.
I love it. I love you have a great voice. I think it's amazing.
Well, I'm going to walk with that all week. So thank you very much. Oh, before we go, you scratched my back. Let me scratch yours. Kelly Jo was watching earlier, and this is not it is a serious question, but it's not going to be a hard hitter. She said his skin is just radiant. And I know that thousands of people would say to me, why, when you had them here, did you not ask about the skincare routine? Why don't we go with that? Because you're putting on makeup and taking it off all the time.
I am.
And people know that can have real implications on the health of your skin. So what's your secret? Mm-hmm. Spill it.
Well, I have several secrets, and I'm very transparent about this. I have Botox and fillers, which does help with the plumpness and firmness of your skin. And I think that's just something that everyone does these days. But in terms of skin routine, I use Kiehl's. I use the Ordinary, which is a great brand and extremely affordable. And I also use Creme de la Mer, which is extremely not affordable. Yeah. But it's like my little bougie thing that I do. So I kind of have like a combination of different brands that I use. Laneige is also really great. And I like to mix it up. Because I find like after a while, your skin gets used to something and it doesn't react as well to it. So I like to mix it up every once in a while and try different things.
I love it. Brock, AKA Brooke Lynn, thank you so much. This has obviously been so much fun. Thanks for taking the time for us.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to seeing the rest of the season.
Yes. And thank you for having me. Can you just do one thing for me? Can you just say goal?
Goal? Like
like a sports presenter would.
Like a soccer goal. Like
and he's getting the goal. There you go.
Brooke Lynn Hytes.
Now my week is complete. Thank you.
You have my permission. If you're looking for a new ringtone, you got it. Thanks, Brooklyn. Have an amazing rest of your day. I don't know where you go from there. I feel like it's time we just roll right into positive reflections. I mean, nobody's having a bad time right now. Sharon's wondering, did you not walk in heels for charity, Jesperson? I did for many years. It was my honor to participate in the Walk a Mile fundraiser for the YWCA. Nobody feels women or people that wear heels had no sympathy, nor should you. For the gripes and the complaining we'd wear these heels and we'd feel so good about ourselves for walking around a downtown square, not even a real true city block, but to walk a mile in these heels. And I'm getting like muscle spasms in my calves after 12 minutes. And Plain Power chiming in says, what an entertaining Monday. James is asking for Sam to turn that into a GIF. Sam's got this gleam in his eye right now. And we'll see what happens there.
I haven't made a GIF for a while.
Yeah,
we got to add to the collection.
It has been a little while, hasn't it?
All right. Duly noted.
People, Chris says there's a flirt alert right on right now. Jillian says I need to guest appear on Drag Race. Hey, I wouldn't put anything past us here on Real Talk. You never know what might come of a conversation like that. I feel like we just made a new friend.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's safe to say.
On RuPaul's Drag Race, they'll do transformations where they'll bring on different guests and they'll get put into drag for the first time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you don't want to go, I will be there.
You will be there. I have to, and there's many local queens. I wouldn't call them local queens. They're just based out of where we live.
There you go.
Right? They're all stars in their own right, but
in their own minds. Yeah.
But it is no, and there's. But it's
You
it's
gotta
like
be.
a
You gotta
real.
be. You gotta be confident, though, Ryan.
And like what Brock was saying there is like there's that certain element of personality that, and there's not a lot of shy queens. There's sort of this now, whether it's in character or whether that's just their personality in or out of drag. When like a team of queens shows up, it just changes every party. Can we all agree on that? Parties get a lot less lame when the drag queens show up.
Have you ever done drag queen bingo? It is so fun.
Drag queen bingo. How does that work?
Drag queens host a bingo night.
Oh, I
and
see. Okay.
It is fun.
Oh, yeah. We could do that for charity. Or we could just not everything has to be for charity. We
They
could
do
just
it for charity.
fun,
The ones that I go to have been done for charity.
Oh, yeah. So I'm sure that makes you feel very good about it. Okay. Our friends at Local Waste want to remind you that if you check them out online at localwaste.ca, you can request a quote or book a bin in Alberta, Saskatchewan. They've got the numbers there, and of course you can contact them by way of the link as well. For more than a quarter century, Local Waste Services has been family-owned, operating with integrity as a core value. They have the word integrity framed and hanging on the wall in their head office, and that means that they're not going to try to grind you in a deal that only works for them. They take pride in working with their clients, their partners, to ensure that everybody's happy with that business relationship. You don't believe me? Give them a call and see for yourself. You can ask for Mikkel, Lauren, or Chris by name. Again, all the details at localwaste.ca.
The following paid advertisement does not necessarily represent the views of Ryan Jesperson, Real Talk, or Relay Communications Group Incorporated. It's time for a fresh perspective. Edmonton deserves a leader who will work for you and with you. Someone who understands the strengths of our community to do things better and faster. Cheryl Watson has built her career on results, not promises. On October 18th, vote Watson for mayor, and together, let's build a city that works. This ad is paid for by the Watson for Mayor campaign.
Our friends at Kuby Energy want to remind you that if you're looking into net zero options, if you've set a sustainable energy goal for yourself, whether it's at your cabin, your cottage, your primary residence, your business, they've got solutions of all sizes and all sorts. They're doing work in BC and Alberta right now out of their offices in Edmonton and Kamloops. Kuby Energy provides solar energy solutions to power your life. They're Tesla certified. All of their installers are either ticketed or apprentices, which means you can trust the job that they're doing. Every Monday, our first show of the week, I should say, our friends at Kuby Energy help us get the week started off on the right foot. They help us reset our focus. Sometimes they restore our faith in humanity. It's a feature we call Positive Reflections. We absolutely loved this tweet from Tim Taylor Smith. I've been so excited to show this to you. He says, "Hey, Ryan, some happy news. After being diagnosed with Parkinson's 10 years ago and numerous broken legs, my wife was able to get back and row again. It's a sport she loves." Tim says, "Of course, these are baby steps, but they are steps forward. My wife helped create Canada's para rowing team." Look at this video. For those of you watching on YouTube, check this out. This is Tim's wife, 10 years after her Parkinson's diagnosis, back out on the water, doing what she loves. That made my week, Tim, and I'm thrilled that you shared it with us. How about this one? A writing competition. This is from Michael, who took the time to chime in at talk@ryanjesperson.com. He says, "My daughter has achieved an amazing thing, and I had to write into Real Talk about it." He says, "Early last month, she received a very special letter, a congratulations of sorts, confirming she made it to the final rounds of a Canadian short story writing contest." He says, "With the circus, with the hellscape that is politics in Alberta these days, I thought we could all use some great news about our kids. They've gone through so much over the past few months. It's a ray of sunshine to see what this has done to my daughter's confidence, all the hard work she's put into her writing this summer." He says she chose to write a fantasy story themed around mental health and she wrote it on a typewriter. He says, that's right, my daughter is old school. She uses it daily, and it's such a joy for me to hear that keyboard clacking away, that bell ringing when I get home from work. Mike, who signs off as the frontline defender, says, oh, and by the way, the publisher is compiling all the winter stories and publishing as a book. As a dad, I could not be more proud. I hope this story lifts the Real Talk community spirit that even during a pandemic, our kids are still pursuing their passions. Mike, the frontline defender, we love it. And congratulations to your daughter. What an exciting opportunity. This from Danielle, who says, Real Talkers, I'm so thankful for the job I have. I'm thankful that it allows me to get out of the house to safely socialize with people. Says, I've got 2 school-age daughters and a son that was born last March. And when I went on mat leave at the start of the pandemic, it was devastating to be stuck at home without a connection to other moms. I'm a social butterfly, and it was really hard on me. So when my mat leave was over, I was so excited to get back to a work routine. I teach the most amazing people on the planet in a little rural school in Murnum, Alberta. She says, we have the best kids. I broke down in tears in our first staff meeting trying to express how much I admire everybody around me. Nothing is ever deemed to be impossible. No school-wide project is ever too ambitious, no matter how much work it'll be. Yeah, it is hard work, but it's so rewarding, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in Murnum, Alberta. That from Danielle. Danielle's email reminded me of that great advice, bloom where you're planted. I thought that was so beautiful. And this one in closing from Lisa. Lisa says, I've recently found myself grounded to my home while I recover from some health challenges. She says, which for a nature and landscape photographer, well, that's akin to torture. While autumn takes hold and the landscape has such beautiful explosions around us, she says, I decided I still needed to create. So I headed out to photograph autumn in my yard as best I could in my favorite way with my macro lens. She says, I hope that these images bring as much joy to you as they did to me. Says Lisa to all Real Talkers, have a wonderful week. Well, Lisa, you made our day. You've knocked our socks off, and thanks for sharing. If something happens in your world, something that puts a smile on your face, something that reminds you about perspective, something that encourages you in a way that really prompts you to take pause, we'd love to hear it. And so would our friends at Kuby Energy. You can submit your positive reflections anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com or hit us up on Twitter with the hashtag RealTalkRJ. Coming up on tomorrow's show, as promised, we'll have in-depth coverage, analysis of the results of the municipal elections happening today in our home province of Alberta. Get out and vote, Real Talkers. Plus, former hockey star Bernie Saunders will join us about his new autobiography, Shut Out, the game that did not love me black. Bernie Saunders coming up on Real Talk tomorrow. In the meantime, make it a great Monday, friends. We'll see you soon.